Hi, how are you doing? It's your friendly neighborhood random guy. And if you ever found what you were looking for, in this video, please like and subscribe. DB Cooper is a media epithet for an unidentified man who hijacked Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727 aircraft operated by Northwest Orient Airlines, in United States airspace on November 24, 1971. During the flight from Portland, Oregon, to Seattle, Washington, the hijacker told a flight attendant he was armed with a bomb, demanded $200,000 in ransom, equivalent to $1,338,000 in 2021, and requested 4 parachutes upon landing in Seattle. After releasing the passengers in Seattle, the hijacker instructed the flight crew to refuel the aircraft and begin a second flight to Mexico City, with a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. About 30 minutes after taking off from Seattle, the hijacker opened the aircraft's aft door, deployed the staircase, and parachuted into the night over southwestern Washington. The hijacker was never identified, apprehended, or found. In 1980, a small portion of the ransom money was found along the banks of the Columbia River. The discovery of the money renewed public interest in the mystery, but yielded no additional information about the hijacker's identity or fate, and the remaining money was never recovered. The hijacker identified himself as Dan Cooper, but because of a reporter's mistake, he became known as DB Cooper. For 45 years after the hijacking, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, maintained an active investigation and built an extensive case file, but ultimately did not reach any definitive conclusions. The crime remains the only unsolved case of air piracy in the history of commercial aviation. The FBI speculates Cooper did not survive his jump, for several reasons: the inclement weather on the night of the hijacking, Cooper's lack of proper skydiving equipment, his drop zone was a heavily wooded area, Cooper's apparent lack of detailed knowledge of his landing area, and the disappearance of the remaining ransom money, suggesting it was never spent. In July 2016, the FBI officially suspended active investigation of the Northwest hijacking case, although reporters, enthusiasts, professional investigators, and amateur sleuths continue to pursue numerous theories for Cooper's identity, success, and fate. Cooper's hijacking and several imitators in the following year led to immediate and major changes for commercial aviation and stricter airport security measures. Metal detectors were installed, baggage inspection became mandatory, and passengers who paid cash for tickets on the day of departure were selected for additional scrutiny. Boeing 727s were retrofitted with eponymous Cooper vanes, specifically designed to prevent the aft staircase from being lowered in flight. By 1973, aircraft hijacking incidents had decreased as the new security measures successfully dissuaded would-be hijackers whose only motive was money. Wow, get a load of this guy. Hijacking. FBI wanted poster of DB Cooper. On Thanksgiving Eve, November 24, 1971, a man carrying a black attaché case approached the flight counter of Northwest Orient Airlines at Portland International Airport. Using cash, the man bought a one-way ticket on Flight 305, a 30-minute trip north to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. On his ticket, the man listed his name as Dan Cooper. Eyewitnesses described Cooper as a white male in his mid-40s, with dark hair and brown eyes, wearing a black or brown business suit, a white shirt and a thin, black tie, a black raincoat, and brown shoes. Carrying a briefcase and a brown paper bag, Cooper boarded Flight 305, a Boeing 727-100, FAA registration N467 US. Cooper took seat 18E in the last row, and ordered a drink, bourbon and 7-Up. With a crew of 6 and 37 passengers aboard, Flight 305 left Portland on schedule at 2:50 p.m. PST. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner, sitting in the jump seat directly behind Cooper. Assuming the note was a lonely businessman's phone number, Schaffner dropped the note unopened into her purse. Cooper then leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner opened the note. In neat, all capital letters printed with a felt tip pen, Cooper had written, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." Schaffner returned the note to Cooper, sat down as Cooper requested, and quietly asked to see the bomb. Cooper opened his briefcase, and Schaffner saw 2 rows of 4 red cylinders she assumed was dynamite. Attached to the cylinders were a wire and a large, cylindrical battery. Cooper closed the briefcase, and told Schaffner his demands. Schaffner wrote a note with Cooper's demands, carried the note to the cockpit, and informed the flight crew of the situation. Captain Scott directed Schaffner to remain in the cockpit for the remainder of the flight and take notes of events as they unfolded. Scott then contacted Northwest Flight Operations in Minnesota, and relayed the hijackers' demands. Cooper requests $200,000 in a knapsack by 5 p.m. He wants 2 front parachutes, 2 back parachutes. He wants the money in negotiable American currency. With Schaffner in the cockpit, flight attendant Tina Mucklow sat next to Cooper to act as a liaison between Cooper and the flight crew in the cockpit. Cooper then made additional demands. Upon landing in Seattle, the fuel trucks must meet the plane and all passengers must remain seated while Mucklow brought the money aboard. After he had the money, said Cooper, he would release the passengers. The last items brought aboard would be the 4 parachutes. Captain William A. Scott informed Seattle, Tacoma Airport Air Traffic Control, ATC, of the situation, and Seattle-Tacoma ATC contacted local police and the FBI. The passengers were told their arrival in Seattle would be delayed because of a minor mechanical difficulty. Donald Narop, the president of Northwest Orient, authorized payment of the ransom and ordered all employees to cooperate with the hijacker and comply with his demands. For approximately 2 hours, Flight 305 circled Puget Sound to give Seattle police and the FBI sufficient time to assemble Cooper's ransom money and parachutes, and to mobilize emergency personnel. During the flight from Portland to Seattle, Cooper demanded flight attendant Mucklow remain by his side at all times. Mucklow said Cooper appeared familiar with the local terrain. While looking out the window, Cooper remarked, "Looks like Tacoma down there," as the aircraft flew above it. Cooper also correctly noted McChord Air Force Base was only a 20-minute drive from Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Mucklow later described the hijacker's demeanor. Cooper was not nervous. He seemed rather nice and he was not cruel or nasty. While the plane circled Seattle, Mucklow chatted with Cooper and asked why he picked Northwest Airlines to hijack. Cooper replied, "It's not because I have a grudge against your airlines, it's just because I have a grudge." Cooper then asked where Mucklow was from, and Mucklow said she was originally from Pennsylvania, but was living in Minneapolis at the time. "Minnesota was very nice country," Cooper responded. Mucklow then asked Cooper where he was from, but he became upset and refused to answer. Cooper then asked Mucklow if she smoked and offered her a cigarette. Mucklow said she had quit, but accepted the cigarette from Cooper. FBI records note Cooper briefly spoke to an unidentified passenger while the plane maintained its holding pattern over Seattle. In his interview with FBI agents, passenger George Labazoniere said he visited the restroom directly behind Cooper on several occasions. After one restroom visit, Labazoniere said the path to his seat was blocked by a passenger wearing a cowboy hat, questioning Mucklow about the alleged mechanical issue with the aircraft. Labazoniere said Cooper was initially amused by the interaction, then became irritated and told the man to return to his seat, but the cowboy ignored Cooper and continued to question Mucklow. Labazoniere claimed he eventually persuaded the cowboy to return to his seat. Mucklow's version of the interaction differed from Labazoniere's. Mucklow said a passenger approached her, and asked for a sports magazine to read because he was bored. Mucklow and the passenger moved to an area directly behind Cooper, where the passenger and she looked for magazines. The passenger took a copy of The New Yorker and returned to his seat. When Mucklow returned to sit with Cooper, he said, "If that is a sky marshal, I don't want any more of that." Despite his brief interaction with Cooper, the cowboy was not interviewed by the FBI and was never identified. FBI agents used several banks in the Seattle area to assemble the ransom. The money, 10,000 unmarked $20 bills, most of which had serial numbers beginning with L, indicating issuance by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, was photographed on microfilm by the FBI. Cooper rejected the military-issue parachutes offered by McCord AFB personnel, and demanded 4 civilian parachutes with manually operated ripcords. Seattle police obtained the 2 front, reserve, parachutes from a local skydiving school and the 2 back, main, parachutes from a local stunt pilot. Passengers released. Boeing 727 with the aft air stair open. Around 5:24 PST, Captain Scott was informed the parachutes had been delivered to the airport, and notified Cooper they would soon be landing. At 5:46 PST, Flight 305 landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Scott asked Cooper's permission and Cooper agreed to park the aircraft on a partially lit runway, away from the main terminal. Cooper demanded only one representative of the airline could approach the plane with the parachutes and money, and the only entrance and exit would be through the aircraft's front door via the mobile air stairs. Northwest Orient's Seattle operations manager, Al Lee, was designated to be the courier who would approach the aircraft with the items Cooper requested. To avoid the possibility that Cooper might mistake Lee's airline uniform for that of a law enforcement officer, he changed into civilian clothes for the task. With the passengers remaining seated, a ground crew attached the mobile staircase. Per Cooper's directive, Mucklow exited the aircraft through the front door, and retrieved the ransom money. When Mucklow returned, she carried the money bag past the seated passengers to Cooper, seated in the last row. Cooper then agreed to release the passengers. As the passengers debarked, Cooper inspected the money. In an attempt to break the tension, Mucklow jokingly asked Cooper if she could have some of the money. Cooper readily agreed, handed Mucklow a packet of bills, but she immediately returned the money and explained accepting gratuities was against company policy. Mucklow said Cooper had tried to tip her and the other 2 flight attendants earlier in the flight with money from his own pocket, but they, too, had declined, citing the company policy. With the passengers safely debarked, only Cooper and the 6 crew members remained aboard Flight 305. In accordance with Cooper's demands, Mucklow made 3 trips outside the aircraft to retrieve the parachutes, and brought them to Cooper in the rear of the plane. While Mucklow brought aboard the parachutes, Schaffner asked Cooper if she could retrieve her purse, stored in a compartment behind his seat. Cooper agreed and told Schaffner, "I won't bite you." Flight attendant Alice Hancock then asked Cooper if the flight attendants could leave, to which Cooper replied, "Whatever you girls would like," so Hancock and Schaffner debarked. When Mucklow brought the final parachute to Cooper, she gave him printed instructions for using the parachutes, but Cooper said he didn't need them. A problem with the refueling process caused a delay, so a second truck and then a third were brought to the aircraft to complete the refueling. During the delay, Mucklow said Cooper complained the money was delivered in a cloth bag instead of a knapsack as he had directed, and he now had to improvise a new way to transport the money. Using a pocket knife, Cooper cut the canopy from one of the reserve parachutes, and stuffed some of the money into the empty parachute bag. An FAA official requested a face-to-face meeting with Cooper aboard the aircraft, but Cooper denied the request. Cooper became impatient, saying, "This shouldn't take so long, and, let's get this show on the road." Cooper then gave the cockpit crew his flight plan and directives, a southeast course toward Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft approximately 100 knots, 185 kilometers per hour, 115 miles per hour, at a maximum 10,000 foot, 3,000 m, altitude. Cooper also specified the landing gear must remain deployed, the wing flaps must be lowered 15 degrees, and the cabin must remain unpressurized. First Officer William J. Ratazik informed Cooper the flight configuration Cooper had specified limited the aircraft's range to about 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers, so a second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico. Cooper and the crew discussed options, and agreed on Reno, Tahoe International Airport as the refueling stop. Cooper further directed the aircraft take off with the rear exit door open and its air stair extended. Northwest's home office objected, leaving the aft staircase deployed during takeoff was unsafe. Cooper countered the procedure was safe, saying, "It can be done, do it," but Cooper did not argue the point and said he would lower the staircase once they were airborne. Cooper demanded Mucklow remain aboard to assist the operation. Back in the air. Crew of Flight 305, upon landing in Reno, L2R, Captain William Scott, co-pilot Bill Ratazik, flight attendant Tina Mucklow, flight engineer Harold E. Anderson. Around 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off, with only Cooper, Mucklow, Captain Scott, First Officer Ratazik, and flight engineer Harold E. Anderson aboard the aircraft. Two F-106 fighters from McChord Air Force Base and a Lockheed T-33 trainer diverted from an unrelated Air National Guard mission followed the 727. All three jets maintained S-flight patterns to stay behind the slow-moving 727 and out of Cooper's view. After takeoff, Cooper told Mucklow to lower the aft staircase. Mucklow told Cooper and the flight crew she feared being sucked out of the aircraft. The flight crew suggested Mucklow come to the cockpit and retrieve an emergency rope with which she could tie herself to a seat. Cooper rejected the suggestion, stating he did not want Mucklow going up front or the flight crew coming back to the cabin. Mucklow continued to express her fear to Cooper, and asked him to cut some cord from one of the parachutes to create a safety line for her. Cooper then told Mucklow he would lower the stairs himself, instructed Mucklow to go to the cockpit, to close the curtain partition, separating the coach and first-class sections, and not to return. Before she left, Mucklow begged Cooper, please take the bomb with you." Cooper responded he would either disarm the bomb or take it with him. As Mucklow walked to the cockpit and turned to close the curtain partition, she saw Cooper standing in the aisle tying what appeared to be the money bag around his waist. From the moment of takeoff to when Mucklow entered the cockpit, only 4 to 5 minutes had elapsed. For the rest of the flight to Reno, Mucklow remained in the cockpit. Mucklow was the last person to see the hijacker. Around 8 p.m., a cockpit warning light flashed, indicating the aft staircase had been activated. The pilot used the cabin intercom to ask Cooper if he needed assistance, but Cooper's last message was a one-word reply, "No." Suddenly, the crew's ears popped. The cabin air pressure had dropped because the aft door was open. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section suddenly pitched upward, forcing the pilots to trim and return the aircraft to level flight. In his interview with the FBI, co-pilot Bill Ratazik said the sudden upward pitch occurred while the flight was near the suburbs north of Portland. With the aft cabin door open and the staircase deployed, the flight crew remained in the cockpit, but were now unsure if Cooper were still aboard. Mucklow used the cabin intercom to inform Cooper they were approaching Reno, and he needed to raise the stairs so the plane could land safely. Mucklow repeated her requests as the pilots made the final approach to land, but neither Mucklow nor the flight crew received a reply from the hijacker. At 11:02 p.m., with the aft staircase still deployed, Flight 305 landed at Reno, Tahoe International Airport. FBI agents, state troopers, sheriff's deputies, and Reno police established a perimeter around the aircraft, but fearing the hijacker and the bomb were still aboard, did not approach the plane. Captain Scott searched the cabin, confirmed Cooper was no longer aboard, and after a 30-minute search, an FBI bomb squad declared the cabin safe. Investigation. In addition to 66 latent fingerprints aboard the airliner, FBI agents recovered Cooper's black clip-on tie clip, and 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of which had been opened and had 2 shroud lines cut from the canopy. FBI agents interviewed eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle, and Reno, and developed a series of composite sketches. Local police and FBI agents immediately began questioning possible suspects. Acting on the possibility the hijacker may have used his real name, or the same alias in a previous crime, Portland police discovered and interviewed a Portland citizen named D.B. Cooper. The Portland Cooper had a minor police record, but was quickly eliminated as a suspect. In his rush to meet a deadline, reporter James Long confused the Portland Cooper with the pseudonym used by the hijacker. United Press International wire service reporter Clyde Jabin republished Long's error, and as other media sources repeated the name, D.B. Cooper became the hijacker's pseudonym. An animation of the 727's rear air stair deploying in flight, with Cooper jumping off, the gravity-operated apparatus remained open until the aircraft landed. Due to the number of variables and parameters, precisely defining the area to search was difficult. The jet's airspeed estimates varied, and the environmental conditions along the flight path varied with the aircraft's location and altitude, and only Cooper knew how long he stayed in free fall before pulling his ripcord. The Air Force F-106 pilots neither saw anyone jumping from the airliner, nor did their radar detect a deployed parachute. Moreover, a black-clad individual jumping into the moonless night would be difficult to see, especially given the limited visibility, cloud cover, and lack of ground lighting. The T-33 pilots did not make visual contact with the 727. On December 6, 1971, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover approved the use of an Air Force State Route 71 Blackbird to retrace and photograph Flight 305's flight path, and to locate the items Cooper carried during his jump. The State Route 71 made 5 flights to retrace Flight 305's route, but due to poor visibility, the photography attempts were unsuccessful. In an experimental recreation, flying the same aircraft used in the hijacking in the same flight configuration, FBI agents pushed a 200-pound, 91 kilograms, sled out of the open-air stair and were able to reproduce the upward motion of the tail section and brief change in cabin pressure described by the flight crew at 8:13 p.m. Initial extrapolations placed Cooper's landing zone within an area on the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington, near Lake Merwin, an artificial lake formed by a dam on the Lewis River. Search efforts focused on Clark and Cowlitz counties, encompassing the terrain immediately south and north, respectively, of the Lewis River in southwest Washington. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies searched large areas of the heavily wooded terrain on foot and by helicopter. Door-to-door searches of local farmhouses were also carried out. Other search parties ran patrol boats along Lake Merwin and Yale Lake, the reservoir immediately to its east. Neither Cooper nor any of the equipment he presumably carried was found. Using fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters from the Oregon Army National Guard, the FBI coordinated an aerial search along the entire flight path, known as Victor 23 in U.S. aviation terminology but Vector 23 in most Cooper literature from Seattle to Reno. Although numerous broken treetops and several pieces of plastic and other objects resembling parachute canopies were sighted and investigated, nothing relevant to the hijacking was found. Shortly after the spring thaw in early 1972, teams of FBI agents aided by some 200 soldiers from Fort Lewis, along with United States Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, and civilian volunteers, conducted another thorough ground search of Clark and Cowlitz counties for 18 days in March, and then another 18 days in April. Electronic Explorations Company, a marine salvage firm, used a submarine to search the 200-foot, 61 m, depths of Lake Merwin. 2 local women stumbled upon a skeleton in an abandoned structure in Clark County. It was later identified as the remains of Barbara Ann Derry, a teenaged girl who had been abducted and murdered several weeks before. Ultimately, the extensive search and recovery operation uncovered no significant material evidence related to the hijacking. Based on early computer projections produced for the FBI, Cooper's drop zone was first estimated to be between Ariel Dam to the north and the town of Battle Ground, Washington, to the south. In March 1972, The FBI concluded their original calculations were incorrect after a joint investigation with Northwest Orient Airlines, and the Air Force determined Cooper probably jumped over the town of La Center, Washington. In 2019, the FBI released a report indicating that about 3 hours after Cooper jumped, a burglary was reported at a small grocery store near Hyson, Washington, an unincorporated community located within the calculated drop zone that Northwest Airlines presented to the FBI. The burglar was noted by the FBI to have taken only survival items such as beef jerky and gloves. Search for ransom money. A month after the hijacking, the FBI distributed lists of the ransom serial numbers to financial institutions, casinos, racetracks, and other businesses that routinely conducted large cash transactions, and to law enforcement agencies around the world. Northwest Orient offered a reward of 15% of the recovered money, to a maximum of $25,000. In early 1972, U.S. Attorney General John N. Mitchell released the serial numbers to the general public. Two men used counterfeit $20 bills printed with Cooper serial numbers to swindle $30,000 from a Newsweek reporter named Carl Fleming in exchange for an interview with a man they falsely claimed was the hijacker. In early 1973, with the ransom money still missing, the Oregon Journal republished the serial numbers and offered $1,000 to the first person to turn in a ransom bill to the newspaper or any FBI field office. In Seattle, the Post-Intelligencer made a similar offer with a $5,000 reward. The offers remained in effect until Thanksgiving 1974, and though several near matches were reported, no genuine bills were found. In 1975, Northwest Orient's insurer, Global Indemnity Co., complied with an order from the Minnesota Supreme Court and paid the airline's $180,000 claim on the ransom money. Later developments. Later analysis indicated that the original landing zone estimate was inaccurate. Captain Scott, who was flying the aircraft manually because of Cooper's speed and altitude demands, later determined his flight path was farther east than initially assumed. Additional data from a variety of sources, in particular Continental Airlines pilot Tom Bohan, who was flying 4 minutes behind Flight 305, indicated the wind direction factored into drop zone calculations had been wrong, possibly by as much as 80 degrees. This and other supplemental data suggested the actual drop zone was south-southeast of the original estimate, in the drainage area of the Washougal River. FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach wrote, "I have to confess, if I were going to look for Cooper, I would head for the Washougal. The Washougal Valley and its surroundings have been searched repeatedly in subsequent years. To date, no discoveries traceable to the hijacking have been reported. Some investigators have speculated that the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens could have obliterated any remaining physical clues. Investigation suspended. On July 8, 2016, the FBI announced active investigation of the Cooper case was suspended, citing the need to focus investigative resources and manpower on issues of higher and more urgent priority. Local field offices would continue to accept any legitimate physical evidence, related specifically to the parachutes or to the ransom money, that may emerge in the future. The 66-volume case file compiled over the 45-year course of the investigation will be preserved for historical purposes at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and on the FBI website. All of the evidence is open to the public. The crime remains the only unsolved case of air piracy in commercial aviation history. Physical evidence. During their forensic search of the aircraft, FBI agents found 4 major pieces of evidence, each with a direct physical link to Cooper: a black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, a hair from Cooper's headrest, and 8 filter-tipped Raleigh cigarette butts from the armrest ashtray. Clip-on necktie. FBI agents found a black clip-on necktie in seat 18E, where Cooper had been seated. Attached to the tie was a gold tie clip with a circular mother-of-pearl setting in the center of the clip. The FBI determined the tie had been sold exclusively at JCPenney department stores, but was discontinued in 1968. By late 2007, the FBI had built a partial DNA profile from samples found on Cooper's tie in 2001. However, the FBI also acknowledged no evidence linked Cooper to the source of the DNA sample. Said FBI Special Agent Fred Gutt, the tie had 2 small DNA samples, and 1 large sample. It's difficult to draw firm conclusions from these samples. The FBI also made public a file of previously unreleased evidence, including Cooper's plane ticket, composite sketches, fact sheets, and posted a request for information about Cooper's identification. In March 2009, a group of citizen sleuths using GPS, satellite imagery, and other technologies unavailable in 1971, began reinvestigating components of the case. Known as the Cooper Research Team, CRT, the group included paleontologist Tom Kay from the Burke Museum of Natural History and Culture in Seattle, scientific illustrator Carol Abrachinskas, and metallurgist Alan Stone. Although the CRT obtained little new information about the buried ransom money or Cooper's landing zone, they found, analyzed, and identified hundreds of organic and metallic particles on Cooper's tie. Using electron microscopy, the CRT identified Lycopodium spores, the source of which was likely pharmaceutical. The team also found minute particles of unalloyed titanium on the tie, along with particles of bismuth, antimony, cerium, strontium sulfide, aluminum, and titanium antimony alloys. The metal and rare earth particles suggested Cooper may have worked for Boeing or another aeronautical engineering firm, at a chemical manufacturing plant, or at a metal fabrication and production facility. The material with the most significance, explained Kay, was the unalloyed titanium. In the 1970s, the use of pure titanium was rare and would only be used in aircraft fabrication facilities, or at chemical companies combining titanium and aluminum to store extremely corrosive substances. The cerium and strontium sulfide were used by Boeing's Supersonic Transport Development Project, and by Portland factories in which cathode ray tubes were manufactured, such as Teledyne and Tektronix. Cooper researcher Eric Ulis has speculated the titanium antimony alloys are linked to Remcrew Titanium Incorporated, a metals manufacturer and Boeing contractor. Hair samples. FBI agents found 2 hair samples in Cooper's seat, a single strand of limb hair on the seat, and a single strand of brown Caucasian head hair on the headrest. The limb hair was destroyed after the FBI crime laboratory determined the sample lacked enough unique microscopic characteristics to be useful. However, the FBI crime laboratory determined the head hair was suitable for future comparison, and preserved the hair on a microscope slide. During their attempts to build Cooper's DNA profile in 2002, the FBI discovered the hair sample had been lost. Cigarette butts. In the armrest ashtray of seat 18E, FBI agents found 8 Raleigh filter-tipped cigarette butts. These were sent to the FBI crime laboratory to search for fingerprints, but investigators were unable to find fingerprints and returned the butts to the Las Vegas field office. In 1998, the FBI sought to extract DNA from the cigarette butts, but discovered the butts had been destroyed while in the custody of the Las Vegas field office. Recovered ransom money. Portion of Brian Ingram's 1980 discovery. On February 10, 1980, 8-year-old Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family on the Columbia River at a beachfront known as Tina, or Tina, Bar, about 9 miles, 14 kilometers, downstream from Vancouver, Washington, and 20 miles, 32 kilometers, southwest of Ariel. He uncovered 3 packets of the ransom cash totaling around $5,800 as he raked the sandy riverbank to build a campfire. The bills had disintegrated from lengthy exposure to the elements, but were still bundled in rubber bands. FBI technicians confirmed that the money was indeed a portion of the ransom, 2 packets of $120 bills each, and a third packet of 90, all arranged in the same order as when given to Cooper. The discovery launched several new rounds of conjecture and ultimately raised more questions than it answered. Initial statements by investigators and scientific consultants were founded on the assumption the bundled bills washed freely into the Columbia River from one of its many connecting tributaries. An Army Corps of Engineers hydrologist noted the bills had disintegrated in a rounded fashion and were matted together, indicating they had been deposited by river action, as opposed to having been deliberately buried. That conclusion, if correct, supported the opinion that Cooper had not landed near Lake Merwin nor any tributary of the Lewis River, which feeds into the Columbia well downstream from Tina Bar. It also lent credence to supplemental speculation the drop zone was near the Washougal River, which merges with the Columbia upstream from the discovery site. The free-floating hypothesis presented difficulties. It did not explain the 10 bills missing from one packet, nor was there a logical reason the 3 packets would have remained together after separating from the rest of the money. Physical evidence was incompatible with geological evidence. Himmelsbach wrote free-floating bundles would have washed up on the bank within a couple of years of the hijacking, otherwise, the rubber bands would have long since deteriorated. Geological evidence suggested the bills arrived at Tina Bar after 1974, the year of a Corps of Engineers dredging operation on that stretch of the river. Geologist Leonard Palmer of Portland State University found 2 distinct layers of sand and sediment between the clay deposited on the riverbank by the dredge and the sand layer in which the bills were buried, indicating that the bills arrived long after dredging had been completed. It's not because I have a grudge against your airlines, it's just because I have a grudge. It is believed by some that this grudge was Lakika's anger toward the FBI for their failed efforts at rescuing his daughter less than 2 months earlier. John List. Main article, John List, murderer. John Emil List, 1925 to 2008, was an accountant and war veteran who murdered his wife, 3 teenage children, an 85-year-old mother in Westfield, New Jersey, 15 days before the Cooper hijacking, withdrew $200,000 from his mother's bank account, and disappeared. He came to the attention of the Cooper task force due to the timing of his disappearance, multiple matches to the hijacker's description, and the reasoning that a fugitive accused of mass murder has nothing to lose. After his capture in 1989, List denied any involvement in the Cooper hijacking. No substantial evidence implicates him, and the FBI no longer considers him a suspect. List died in prison in 2008. Ted Mayfield. Theodore Ernest Mayfield, 1935 to 2015, was a Special Forces veteran, pilot, competitive skydiver, and skydiving instructor. He served time in 1994 for negligent homicide after 2 of his students died when their parachutes failed to open, and was later found indirectly responsible for 13 additional skydiving deaths due to faulty equipment and training. In 2010, he was sentenced to 3 years probation for piloting a plane 26 years after losing his pilot's license and rigging certificates. He was suggested repeatedly as a suspect early in the investigation, according to FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach, who knew Mayfield from a prior dispute at a local airport. He was ruled out, based partly on the fact that he called Himmelsbach less than 2 hours after Flight 305 landed in Reno to volunteer advice on standard skydiving practices and possible landing zones, as well as information on local skydivers. Richard McCoy Jr. Main article, Richard McCoy Jr. Richard McCoy Jr. Richard McCoy, 1942 to 1974, was an Army veteran who served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, first as a demolition expert and later with the Green Berets as a helicopter pilot. After his military service, he became a warrant officer in the Utah National Guard and an avid recreational skydiver, with aspirations of becoming a Utah State Trooper. On April 7, 1972, McCoy staged the best known of the so-called copycat hijackings, see below. He boarded United Airlines Flight 855, a Boeing 727 with aft stairs, in Denver, Colorado, and, brandishing what later proved to be a paperweight resembling a hand grenade and an unloaded handgun, he demanded 4 parachutes and $500,000. After delivery of the money and parachutes at San Francisco International Airport, McCoy ordered the aircraft back into the sky and bailed out over Provo, Utah, leaving behind his handwritten hijacking instructions and his fingerprints on a magazine he had been reading. He was arrested on April 9 with the ransom cash in his possession and, after trial and conviction, received a 45-year sentence. 2 years later, he escaped from Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary with several accomplices by crashing a garbage truck through the main gate. Tracked down 3 months later in Virginia Beach, McCoy was killed in a shootout with FBI agents. In their 1991 book, D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy, parole officer Bernie Rhodes and former FBI agent Russell Calamy asserted that they had identified McCoy as Cooper. They cited obvious similarities in the two hijackings, claims by McCoy's family that the tie and mother-of-pearl tie clip left on the plane belonged to McCoy, and McCoy's own refusal to admit or deny that he was Cooper. A proponent of their claim was the FBI agent who killed McCoy. "When I shot Richard McCoy," he said, "I shot D.B. Cooper at the same time." Although there is no reasonable doubt that McCoy committed the Denver hijacking, the FBI does not consider him a suspect in the Cooper case because of mismatches in age and description, a level of skydiving skill well above that thought to be possessed by the hijacker, and credible evidence that McCoy was in Las Vegas on the day of the Portland hijacking, and at home in Utah the day after, having Thanksgiving dinner with his family. Vincent C. Peterson. On November 11, 2022, Eric Ulis held a press conference putting forward Vincent C. Peterson as a person of interest. While researching the spectrum analysis that was done on Cooper's tie, Ulis discovered 3 particles that appeared to be a very rare titanium antimony alloy. Peterson worked at a company named RemCrew, based in Midland, Pennsylvania, and later in Metro Pittsburgh, that manufactured titanium antimony alloys. Sheridan Peterson. The 1971 sketch of Cooper's description, and photo of Peterson from around the same time. Sheridan Peterson, 1926 to 2021, served in the Marine Corps during World War II and was later employed as a technical editor at Boeing, based in Seattle. Investigators took an interest in Peterson as a suspect soon after the skyjacking because of his experience as a smoke jumper and love of taking physical risks, as well as his similar appearance and age, 44, to the Cooper description. Peterson often teased the media about whether he was really Cooper. Entrepreneur Eric Ulis, who spent years investigating the crime, said he was 98% convinced that Peterson was Cooper, but when pressed by FBI agents, Peterson insisted he was in Nepal at the time of the hijacking. He died in 2021. In an episode of History Channel's History's Greatest Mysteries, Season 1, Episode 1, first aired on November 14, 2020, analysis of DNA found on the tie worn by Cooper indicated that Peterson was not a match for Cooper when compared to a DNA sample from one of Peterson's living daughters. Robert Rackstraw. FBI sketch of D.B. Cooper from 1971 compared to 1970 Army ID picture of Robert Rackstraw. Robert Wesley Rackstraw, 1943 to 2019, was a retired pilot and ex-convict who served on an Army helicopter crew and other units during the Vietnam War. He came to the attention of the Cooper Task Force in February 1978, after he was arrested in Iran and deported to the U.S. to face explosives possession and check-kiting charges. Several months later, while released on bail, Rackstraw attempted to fake his own death by radioing a false Mayday call and telling controllers that he was bailing out of a rented plane over Monterey Bay. Police later arrested him in Fullerton, California, on an additional charge of forging federal pilot certificates. The plane he claimed to have ditched was found, repainted, in a nearby hangar. Cooper investigators noted his physical resemblance to Cooper composite sketches, although he was only 28 in 1971, military parachute training, and criminal record, but eliminated him as a suspect in 1979 after no direct evidence of his involvement could be found. In 2016, Rackstraw re-emerged as a suspect in a history program and a book. On September 8, 2016, Thomas J. Colbert, the author of the book, and attorney Mark Zaid filed a lawsuit to compel the FBI to release its Cooper case file under the Freedom of Information Act. In 2017, Colbert and a group of volunteer investigators uncovered what they believed to be a decades-old parachute strap at an undisclosed location in the Pacific Northwest. This was followed later in 2017 with a piece of foam, which they suspected was part of Cooper's parachute backpack. In January 2018, Tom and Donna Colbert reported that they had obtained a confession letter originally written in December 1971 containing codes that matched 3 units Rackstraw was a part of while in the Army. One of the Flight 305 flight attendants reportedly did not find any similarities between photos of Rackstraw from the 1970s and her recollection of Cooper's appearance. Rackstraw's attorney called the renewed allegations the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and Rackstraw himself told People magazine, "It's a lot of expletive, and they know it is." The FBI declined further comment. Rackstraw stated in a 2017 phone interview that he lost his job over the 2016 investigations. "I told everybody I was the hijacker," Rackstraw told Colbert, before explaining the admission was a stunt. He died in 2019. Walter R. Reca. Walter R. Reca, 1933 to 2014, was a former military paratrooper and intelligence operative. He was proposed as a suspect by his friend Carl Lauren in 2018. In 2008, Reca told Lauren via a recorded phone call that he was the hijacker. Reca gave Lauren permission in a notarized letter to share his story after his death. He also allowed Lauren to tape their phone conversations about the crime over a 6-week period in late 2008. In over 3 hours of recordings, Reca shared details about his version of the hijacking. He also confessed to his niece, Lisa's story. From Reca's description of the terrain on his way to the drop zone, Lauren concluded that he landed near Cle Elum, Washington. After Reca described an encounter with a dump truck driver at a roadside cafe after he landed, Lauren located Jeff Osiadax, who was driving his dump truck near Cle Elum the night of the hijacking, and met a stranger at the Tina Way Junction Cafe just outside of town. The man asked Osiadax to give his friend directions to the cafe over the phone, presumably to be picked up, and he complied. Lauren convinced Joe Koenig, a former member of the Michigan State Police, of Reca's guilt. Koenig later published a book on Cooper, titled Getting the Truth, IMDb Cooper. These claims have aroused skepticism. Cle Elum is well north and east of Flight 305's known flight path, more than 150 miles, 240 kilometers, north of the drop zone assumed by most analysts, and even further from Tina Bar, where a portion of the ransom money was found. Reca was a military paratrooper and private skydiver with hundreds of jumps to his credit, in contradiction to the FBI's publicized profile of an amateur skydiver at best. Reca also did not resemble the composite portrait the FBI assembled, which Lauren and Osiadax used to explain why Osiadax's suspicions were not aroused at the time. In response to the allegations against Reca, the FBI said that it would be inappropriate to comment on specific tips provided to them, and that no evidence to date had proved the culpability of any suspect beyond a reasonable doubt. William J. Smith in 1985. In November 2018, The Oregonian published an article proposing William J. Smith, 1928 to 2018, of Bloomfield, New Jersey, as a suspect. The article was based on research conducted by an Army data analyst who sent his findings to the FBI in mid-2018. Smith, a New Jersey native, was a World War II veteran. After high school, he enlisted in the United States Navy and volunteered for combat aircrew training. After his discharge, he worked for the Lehigh Valley Railroad and was affected by the Penn Central Transportation Company's bankruptcy in 1970, the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history at that time. The article proposed that the loss of his pension created a grudge against the corporate establishment and transportation field, as well as a sudden need for money. Smith was 43 at the time of the hijacking. In his high school yearbook, a list of alumni killed in World War II lists an IRA Daniel Cooper, possibly the source for the hijacker's pseudonym. The analyst claimed that Smith's naval aviation experience would have given him knowledge of planes and parachutes, and his railroad experience would have helped him find railroad tracks and hop on a train to escape the area after landing. According to the analyst, aluminum spiral chips found on the clip-on tie could have come from a locomotive maintenance facility. Smith's information about the Seattle area may have come from his close friend Dan Clare, who was stationed at Fort Lewis during the war. The analyst noted that the man who claimed to be Cooper in Max Gunther's 1985 book identified himself as Dan LeClaire. Smith and Clare worked together for Conrail at Newark's Oak Island Yard. Smith retired from that facility as a yard master. The article noted that a picture of Smith on the Lehigh Valley Railroad website showed a remarkable resemblance to Cooper FBI sketches. The FBI said that it would be inappropriate to comment on tips related to Smith. Dwayne L. Weber. Dwayne L. Weber, 1924 to 1995, was a World War II Army veteran who served time in at least 6 prisons from 1945 to 1968 for burglary and forgery. He was proposed as a suspect by his widow, Jo, based primarily on a deathbed confession. 3 days before he died in 1995, Weber told his wife, "I am Dan Cooper." The name meant nothing to her, she said, but months later, a friend told her of its significance in the hijacking. She went to her local library to research Cooper, found Max Gunther's book, and discovered notations in the margins in her husband's handwriting. Like the hijacker, Weber drank bourbon and chain-smoked. Other circumstantial evidence included a 1979 trip to Seattle and the Columbia River, where his wife remembered him throwing a trash bag just upstream of Tina Bar. Himmelsbach said, "Weber does fit the physical description, and does have the criminal background that I have always felt was associated with the case, but did not believe Weber was Cooper." The FBI eliminated Weber as an active suspect in July 1998 when his fingerprints did not match any of those processed in the hijacked plane, and no other direct evidence could be found to implicate him. Later, his DNA also failed to match the samples recovered from Cooper's tie. With that being said, the case was never solved. Oh man, please like and subscribe if you found what you were looking for. Also for the sake of me talking for hours. Until next time, your friendly neighborhood random guy.